Misuse of Drugs Act 1971, Amendment Number 2, Order 2014. Lord Taylor of Holbeach.
My Lords, I beg to move the draft Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 Amendment Number 2, Order 2013, and to consider the draft Criminal Justice and Police Act 2001 Amendment Order 2013. My Lords, the Government seeks to control Khat as a Class C drug under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971 to protect the public from potential harms associated with this drug and the threat posed from its international trafficking. Through the second draft order laid by the Ministry of Justice, the Government is seeking to extend the use of penalty notices for disorder, PNDs, the offence of simple possession of Khat, when it is the second time that the offence has been committed. By a negative instrument, the financial penalty for the Khat PND will be set at £60. On the first occasion that an offence has been committed, a person is likely to be issued with a non-statutory Khat warning. Anyone caught possessing Khat for the third time or more will face arrest. This reflects the policing strategy for Khat possession cases agreed with the National Policing Lead for Drugs. My Lords, both draft orders were considered in Grand Committee on the 31st of March. The House will be aware that both draft orders have been approved in the House of Commons. I commend the two orders to the House.
The question is that this motion be agreed to. Amendment Baroness Smith.
My Lords, I'm grateful to the Minister for his explanation, and I can explain why we've brought this regret motion before the House today. It's around 6 weeks since we discussed this issue in the Grand Committee. I'm also going to say to the Noble Lord and thank him for asking to meet with me prior to this regret motion for discussion we had on the issue during recess. In the committee, the Noble Lord Ahmed responded for the Government, and he agreed that this was a finely balanced decision. The Advisory Committee on the Misuse of Drugs, the ACMD, do not advise that the drug should be banned due to a lack of robust evidence and the fact it considers it to be a much less potent stimulant than other commonly used drugs. And as identified in the Grand Committee, successive governments have considered whether Khat should be banned, but the evidence has not been clear enough or strong enough previously to support such a ban. And it's clear from the evidence base in the explanatory memorandum and the Government's assessment of the options that the decision remains a finely balanced one, and one of the new considerations is the impact of the ban by other European countries. So, my Lords, having considered the evidence, we accept that the benefits of a ban could outweigh the risks. As I stated previously, there are a number of assurances needed from the Government before that is clear. When we debated this in committee and sought assurances from the Government, we didn't do so unexpectedly. My colleague, the Shadow Home Office Minister, Diana Johnson, in the other place, had discussions with the Minister taking responsibility of this order, which curiously wasn't the Drugs Minister, Norman Baker, but instead it was Minister Karen Brady. But she spoke to her regarding our concerns and the issues and conditions we consider to be essential if a ban is in place. And these were raised in the debate in committee in the other place on the 31st of March, and indeed in our own debate on the same day. And I had also notified the Noble Minister's office of our concerns. And both my colleague Diana Johnson and myself were disappointed with the responses from the Government. So this debate today on our regret motion is another attempt to seek reassurances from the Government on the implementation of such a ban. So there's no surprises and no reasons of which I'm aware that full answer to the points we've raised should not be forthcoming. Now, my Lords, I don't think I need to repeat the detail of the committee debate on the harms of the drugs or the risks associated with a ban. They're well documented in those debates, in the explanatory memorandum, in the impact assessment, indeed also in the letter from the Home Secretary. We are aware of the social and possibly health harms associated with Khat, and which communities, largely the Somali and Yemeni communities in the UK, are most likely to use the drug. Overall, just 0.2% of the population have used Khat, but some 50% of Somali males are thought to be users and up to 10% daily users. But we're also aware it's very difficult to separate the social harms of Khat from the wider social issues faced by the Somali community and also, though to a lesser extent, the Yemeni and Ethiopian communities. And we're also aware of significant and strong support from within the Somali community for a ban. But, my Lords, it also has to be recognised that neither the ACMD or the Home Office review have been able to isolate Khat as the cause of problems or whether it exacerbates existing social problems. Khat has been linked to health harms, including liver toxicity, tooth loss, as well as health issues relating to the manner in which it's consumed, as well as mental health problems amongst the Somali community. But again, the evidence in relation to physical health is not considered by the ACMD, the committee that advises the government on the misuse of drugs, as being robust enough to justify a ban. So, my Lords, we also have to examine the risks of banning Khat. And we recognise in assessing the risk, we have to consider the risk of the UK becoming a hub for illegal exports to other EU countries and to the US, who have already implemented bans. And I understand that's a key issue behind the government's intention to ban the drug. Now, my Lords, I asked the Noble Lord Minister in Committee, Noble Lord Ahmed, whether there was any evidence that Khat imports into the UK were increasing and that the UK was being used as a base for illegal imports. He was able to advise there had been a change, though I have to say I'm not 100% clear from the figures how significant that change is. But, of course, that's a very reasonable issue for the government to take into account, and clarification on the scale of the problem would be helpful. And when looking at the risks, I think it's relevant that the government considers there would be a minimal impact on the criminal justice system, though it also recognises that enforcement costs may initially be high. So the government recognises there is a significant risk that it could damage community relations, as Khat use is both common and widely accepted within the Somali, Yemeni and Ethiopian communities. And that would mean that banning Khat would criminalise an established and accepted social practice. So the regret motion before us today would not prevent the ban, but because the impact must be fully understood and handled very carefully, we have identified 4 areas that are essential to ensuring that any ban does not damage community relations, does not lead to displacement with other drugs and therefore lead to more serious social and health impacts. So we have 4 issues, and I know the Noble Lord's aware of these issues that we wish to raise today that we think are essential before any ban should proceed. And the first one is the review. Now, particularly as this is a very finely balanced decision, we think there has to be a review after 12 months that looks at the impact of reclassification, and I would include in that the impact on organised crime as well as community relations. That should include a monitoring framework outlined by the Home Affairs Select Committee. That was their second recommendation in their report. Now, I know the government already collects some of that data in relation to drugs, but I think because Khat is unique amongst drugs and it is focused on particular communities, there needs to be some specific data collected on community relations, and rather than just see that published as part of the overall publication of statistics and figures on crime and community relations and drug use, there should be a separate review published on Khat. Now, my Lords, one of the issues the Noble Minister very helpfully discussed with me when we met was the issue of policing. And because Khat is highly prevalent in the Somali and Yemeni communities, the introduction of a ban on Khat would allow any Somali Yemeni male to be subject to stop and search. Now, I know the Minister recognises this could have a seriously detrimental effect on community relations, and the government are bringing in changes to stop and search. Now, although we discussed this, it would be, I think, helpful if you could put on record how the government will ensure this doesn't undermine the prevent agenda, which is now being focused on Somali and Yemeni communities. One of the risks I think we can particularly identify, because Khat is a social drug, that it's linked to numerous businesses, including cafes and community centres. And so policing has to be very sensitive to those risks. And to ensure that this happens, we want a specific policing strategy agreed by the APCO leads for drugs and also the prevent agenda. And that should be in place before a ban is enforced. Now, I mentioned my meeting with the Noble Minister and his officials, and he was able to outline some of these issues regarding policing. I'm aware the government is giving serious consideration to the issue. And he did agree at that meeting to provide me with details and copies of the draft guidance currently being considered, but I haven't yet had it. And I know he would want me to have a copy of that. I think it would have been helpful for the debate today, but if we could have a copy of that, it would be, I think, very helpful. The other issue we discussed when we met was I reiterated a programme that was needed of engagement and support for the Somali communities, because there needs to be some kind of education about the dangers of drugs and alcohol, because the last thing I think anybody wants to see is Khat, which is the advisory committee, recognises the evidence on the harms is not robust enough, it says, for a ban. But if that was replaced with drugs, alcohol, illegal drugs, prescription drugs, that would be a very serious matter and could cause greater health harms. Now, when we discussed this, the Honourable Minister wasn't to be able to provide with any further information other than that he was sure this was ongoing. But these programmes will be essential, and if he is able to provide more information today, that should be extremely helpful to our considerations. And my Lords, I think the final point is on international development, an issue recognised by the Select Committee in the other place. The Department for International Development has to commit to work with the Kenyan government to alleviate the effect of the Khat ban on the Kenyan economy. Now, when we discussed this, the Noble Lord Minister was confident that Kenyan farming was robust enough to diversify, and he is more of an expert on farming than I am. But, and I hope that will be the case. But a Select Committee did identify this as being a very serious issue. My understanding is that the Department is working with Kenyan authorities, but I think we really do need further information on this, and that would be part of the review that should be undertaken and reported on a year's time, so we can understand the work that is ongoing. My Lords, these are very real and genuine concerns. As I said, we're not opposing the ban, but we really do consider that before any ban was to be implemented, these kind of issues have to be concerned and in place first. And I hope we'd have a positive response from the Honourable Minister on that today. I beg to...
The original question was that the draft order laid before the House on the 31st of October 2013 be approved, since when an amendment has been moved by Lady Smith of Basildon at the end to insert the words set out on the order paper. The question is that this amendment be agreed to.
I have difficulties both with the substance of the orders and with the regret motion. It seems to me that we may be in something of a world of policy-based evidence, and of a motion which is being brought to the House because the opposition is looking for something to object to without objecting to the ban itself. The matters identified in the motion seem to me to be good reasons to oppose the ban, but the opposition support it. The ACMD not only recommended no change in the status of Khat and that it not be controlled under the Misuse of Drugs Act, but set out a number of other recommendations dealing with local needs assessments, education and prevention initiatives, culturally specific and tailored treatment and recovery services, partnership working, addressing problems through engagement and dialogue with the local community and interagency working through community safety partnerships, regular monitoring returns, and it made a specific recommendation about data to form the basis of future research. Those, I would have thought, themselves formed a very good motion, but however that's not what is before us. As regards the ban, the ACMD was quite clear on the merits of this. The Secretary of State, on the other hand, seems, if I can summarise it, to say it's been banned in the rest of the EU, so it must be banned here. The ban was announced last July, and I wonder if my noble friend can tell the House what evidence there's been as to use since that announcement. Some time has now gone by. Indeed, it's been banned in the rest of the EU since January of last year, so if there are concerns, some of these may have come to light. One of the reasons that we're given for the proposed ban is the risk of this country becoming a regional hub or a haven for criminals. I was interested to read some of the characteristics of Khat, one of which is that it has a very short life. the active ingredient declines after a couple of days from it being picked. It needs to be fresh for it to have an effect. And I have no doubt that the users of it as consumers are as demanding as consumers of most products. So is it a real concern, a genuine concern, that we would become a regional hub if what might be distributed through the hub has in fact lost its efficacy by the time it's traded on? The risks identified from a ban include the users moving towards more addictive and harmful and expensive substances, a black market, organised crime stepping in to supply the drug, and of course criminalising inevitably the users. I appreciate the proposals about applying an escalator to how offences are dealt with, but criminalising users and suppliers, and what we do know that one crime leads to another. Of course, my lords, I'm aware that the Minister in the Commons and the Home Secretary in her response to the Home Affairs Select Committee have presented the matter as finely balanced, and that the communities where use is widespread are divided. I've been wondering, looking at the reports, about how broadly women in those communities want a ban and the men don't, whether that is actually rather simplistic reporting. I find it difficult to think that a ban would instantly lead to such a considerable behavioural change and make model husbands of former users. I have my doubts about that. But there is one view which clearly is coming from the Somali community, and that's that they would prefer their children to use Khat than alcohol or tobacco. My lords, I'd also say that the ACMD has reported that the use of Khat has been decreasing over recent years. In the Commons, there was very little, I think nothing from the Minister about the broader issues of drugs policy or the wider context to which there's been reference just now of the economy of Kenya and the potential instability and risks associated with that. My lords, I'd be very wary of banning something of cultural significance and of the risk of driving a wedge between the police and already quite marginalised communities. The references in the reports to the use of Khat at weddings made me think of sugared almonds at weddings in some other traditions, and how one might respond to any suggestion that tradition be changed. So, in summary, my lords, I'm not persuaded by the orders, but I'm not persuaded by the motion. I would leave the balance as it is.
My Lords, I rise to support the regret motion on the decision of the Home Secretary to ban Khat under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act, though I do identify actually with the comments of Baroness Hamway in relation to the regret motion. I think there are very good reasons, in fact, to oppose this ban. I want to make clear at the outset that if Khat were presented a serious health risk to users, I would support a ban on the importation and sale of the substance. On the other hand, we now have sufficient evidence to show that banning the possession and use of psychoactive substances, even dangerous ones, is counterproductive. Of course, the excessive use of Khat by small groups of Somalians needs to be tackled. The question is how. We know that bans on possession and use delay treatment, divert resources away from public health and educational initiatives and into the criminal justice system. We also know that a criminal record is extremely damaging to the employment prospects of anyone, and therefore the criminalisation of these people will tend to lead them to continue with their drug habit, or indeed, if they ever get away from it, to return to it. So there are very severe consequences, and I think very negative consequences, of banning, particularly on the consumer side. That is the evidence framework within which I've thought about the Home Secretary's decision to ignore the advice of the ACMD and to ban not only the supply but also the possession and use of cat. This is a most serious decision for the communities involved, people principally from, of course, Somalia, Yemen and Ethiopia. The small but vociferous group of campaigners from Somalia believe that a ban on cat will get rid of the problems as they perceive them, and there are social problems within families and so on. In reality, those using cat will continue using the substance at a vastly increased price, and the Home Affairs Select Committee 9th report suggested a 100-fold increase in price can be expected from a ban on cat. The cat user who continued to use cat would also risk, of course, as I said, a criminal record. Or the alternative, of course, as others have alluded to, is that cat will be replaced by, in particular, I would suggest, alcohol. And we know that alcohol is, in fact, far more dangerous, will have all sorts of consequences that cat doesn't have. Either consequence, therefore, will be very much worse than the status quo. Albeit, I'm not suggesting the status quo is wonderful, but it isn't anything like as serious as the consequences that could be caused. The idea that the household will have more cash to spend on food is sadly a delusion, and I do believe that some of the issues for the women are that they see their husband spending whatever it is, £25 on cat, and they think, oh, we could do with that to buy some shoes for the kids. So I really do think this is a little bit more complex. The ACMD had clear scientific reasons for advising the Home Secretary, and I quote, that the evidence of harms associated with the use of cat is insufficient to justify control, and it would be inappropriate and disproportionate to classify cat under the Misuse of Drugs Act 1971. Now, these are very strong words from the ACMD, and particularly a council led by Professor Leslie Iverson, who I know quite well, a highly regarded scientist and somebody known for his incredible moderation and gentleness and so on. He's not a wild man. If he allows words like that to go forward to the government, then I really think we need to take note. The two central findings concern the medical and social harms, as others have indicated. The ACMD conclude that cat has no direct causal links to adverse medical effects, other than a small number of reports of an association between cat use and significant liver toxicity. Small number and association. Now, in scientific lingo, as we know, association simply means the two things tend to happen alongside. There is no indication of a causal link between the use of cat and medical consequences. On the question of the anecdotal evidence of social harms, the ACMD conclude that their research into these concerns has found no robust evidence which demonstrates a causal link between cat consumption and any of the harms indicated. Professor Iverson emphasised in his letter to the Home Secretary that the Council's recommendations are based on a rigorous and systematic process of evidence gathering and subsequent analysis of what was submitted and presented to them. In other words, as I understand it, the recommendation should not be set aside other than for matters of serious national security or national interest. Now, my understanding is that the main reasons for the Home Secretary's decision have nothing to do with the medical and social risks, actually, and they are twofold. First, as others have mentioned, that Sweden and the Netherlands in particular have banned cat and would find it helpful if the UK took the same step in order to avoid this hub. But I think Baroness Hamwi has dealt really very effectively with that point, bearing in mind the very short life of the substances within cat that people are interested in. And the other issue that has been raised, though I find it utterly peculiar, is that there's some relationship between cat use and terrorism. I do find this quite remarkable, and if I can deal with the terrorism issue very quickly first, I would say that a very small trade in a perfectly legal substance, low cost, for a few BME communities, is not a serious candidate for a terrorist threat. It just isn't, or for terrorist interest. Indeed, the ACMD had not been provided with any evidence of Al-Shabaab or any other terrorist group's involvement in the export or sale of cat, despite consultation with the relevant national and international official bodies. I understand the Home Secretary has claimed that the ACMD wouldn't have been aware of these things. Well, they were aware of the people who are aware of these things and consulted them. And the fact that they picked up nothing in this area, I think we should take seriously. On the other hand, banning a substance like Khat and increasing its value 100-fold and more really might interest terrorists. It does seem to me, even on that count, this ban could be counterproductive and could be expected to be counterproductive. As far as the first reason is concerned, the hub possibility, I think the first question one has to ask is, are the bans in these other countries working? There is apparently no evidence that they are working and that they are helpful, and I wouldn't expect them to be helpful. So the idea that we follow other people simply because they want us to follow does seem to me to be a little wrong, let's say. Now I want to turn to a little proposal that I want to put on it with respect to Khat. The government introduced temporary class drug orders for the purposes of controlling new psychoactive substances. By the way, I'm not going to go on very long on this one, but I do want to put it forward. I want to applaud the government for this policy. Its great strength is that these TCDOs do not criminalise the possession and use of these drugs while the TCDO remains in place. It does, however, provide for the ban of production and sale of substances which may prove dangerous. These orders were designed to enable the ACMD to analyse new drugs and to determine whether a full ban under the 1971 Misuse of Drugs Act could be justified. Since the only possible justification given by the government and by the Home Secretary, I emphasise, for a ban of Khat concerns the supply of Khat to other European countries or supply involving terrorists, not that this point, I think, needs to be taken seriously, but an order along the lines of a TCDO which avoided criminalising users of Khat would fulfil the government's own objectives while avoiding causing unnecessary and severe consequences for the BME communities affected. The 12-month review proposed in the regret motion would then evaluate a narrower issue, the supply ban, the inevitable price increase, for example, and the illegal activity which will inevitably result. The ACMD could do this work, their results could be put to the Home Secretary, and if the supply ban was seen not to be in the national interest, it could be dropped, and the ACMD recommended education and preventive initiatives, tailored treatment and other social interventions could then be funded instead of that money going into the criminal justice system. There is just an awful lot to be said for that approach, it seems to me. The ACMD thought about it very, very carefully, and that is what they came up with. The above proposition is relevant even at this stage, if I may say so, my Lords. We know some 40% of legislation is never implemented. It is surely possible for the government to implement the supply side only of their ban and defer, hopefully indefinitely, implementation of the ban on possession and use of Khat. Such a plan would enable a more focused 12-month review, as I've already mentioned. I hope the Minister will be willing to take this idea away, even at this late stage, in the hope that a supply ban only could be introduced and then evaluated to see whether it should continue.
Of course, on a focused topic like this, almost everything that could be said has been said. My noble friend has already included 4 reasons in her motion for not going ahead with the reclassification of Khat in her motion of regret. And I think all these 4 reasons have been covered fairly fully by other speakers. But there are a number of other cogent reasons why the government shouldn't go ahead with this proposal. Of course, a lot of these have been spoken to by other speakers as well. But they're stated very clearly in the report of the ACMD, which Noble Baroness Meacher has described more fully, which was sent to the Home Secretary in January last year. And then after that, the Home Affairs Committee reported last November. I'm not aware of the effects of Khat have changed much since those reports were sent to the Home, republished or sent to the Home Secretary. The ACMD says that Khat has no causal link to adverse medical effects, other than a small number of reports of an association between Khat use and significant liver toxicity not of sufficient importance to recommend controlling the substance under the Misuse of Drugs Act. Baroness Meacher has mentioned that it was an association, not a proven causal association. But the report from the ACMD also has, as Baroness Meacher said, a number of very useful recommendations to health and social care boards regarding Khat, which central and local government would do very well to study and implement. The main argument put forward by the Home Office with banning Khat is that otherwise the UK may become a hub for its distribution, as mentioned by both the preceding speakers. But I suggest that if this was happening, was going to happen, it would have happened already. It would already be occurring. Whereas, in fact, the use of Khat in this country, and I assume the importation of Khat to this country, is actually falling. And I would also like to repeat Baroness Hamwey's question to the Noble Minister. Could he actually give us any figures about the use or importation of Khat to this country, or whether there is any evidence of the smuggling out of this country of Khat to countries in Europe? Very difficult, as Baroness Hamwey said, because it has to be done within 2 or 3 days, or it's more or less unsaleable. But I think the most important reason for not going ahead with this order are as Noble Baroness Meacher has said, the unintended consequences which would follow. To start with, the use of Khat will probably not come down any faster than it already is. Banning substances which are widely used has little effect on their level of use. This is a fact which governments, and not only this one, are rather reluctant to accept. Another serious consequences would be, as Baroness Meacher has said, to criminalise a section of an already poor and marginalised community, the Somalis in Britain, to a lesser extent some members of Kenyan immigrants and Yemenis. But perhaps the most important consequence might be the substitution of Khat by more powerful alternatives, already mentioned, such as alcohol and other stimulants, such as crack cocaine, and other forms of speed, amphetamines, for instance, or methadone. I join with other noble lords, and baronesses rather, in pleading with the noble lord to reconsider the proposal to go ahead with this order, for the very good reasons that I think Baroness Meacher put very cogently.
My Lords, I welcome this further opportunity to set out the government's approach to Khat, which allows me to focus in particular on the activities to support the successful implementation of the ban on Khat. And I think it has been that which has laid at the heart of a lot of questions raised by noble lords. I take those concerns seriously. I'm reassured that the points raised in debate today are nearly all matters which were considered in the early stages of our decision when we considered what our response should be to the issues involved with this drug. And it was Lady Hamwey and indeed Lord Reid who actually asked what is the new evidence on trafficking? What sort of figures do we have on this drug? Well, the new evidence emerged after the ACMD published its report, and the Dutch banned Khat in January 2013, which included reports received from law enforcement agencies. It pointed to increases in numbers and volumes of Khat in transit via the UK to European countries, where it is banned. The latest update we have on seizures of khat during the first 3 months of this year show that 17 seizures with a combined net weight of over 11.5 tonnes of khat originated from the UK were made in France en route to other countries where khat is banned, including Denmark, Germany, Belgium and the Netherlands. This is evidence, in my view, of this country becoming a substantial hub for this material. If I may, just before I address the particular concerns of Lady Smith and yes.
He's given the figures, which I think are helpful, but can he give a comparative figure of how that has changed over time? Because if the premise is that the illegal imports or seizures are up, they must be up against another figure, and that's the point I made from the comments we had in committee. We had those figures, but not the comparative figures.
I don't have those figures to hand, but I think the Noble Baroness would understand that if this material is arriving in this country to be distributed, as I have illustrated, to other countries, then it does confirm the view that this country is serving as a distribution hub in a way that would not have happened before those countries banned the use of this material. And I think that's the point that the government has had to consider. But if I may, the Noble Baroness was very good. She came to see us, and we had a really good and useful meeting talking about the issues that were concerning her, and I will address her issues. But I'd like perhaps to consider other speakers first, if I may. Because, my noble friend Lady Hamway wanted to know what the UK Somali Networks report had actually had to say, and it's quite an important aspect that, according to testimonies given by community leaders and mothers, the following areas of a person's life can be affected by khat use. Disagreements and frustration over drug use can cause family arguments and affect personal relationships. Legal and health problems associated with khat use add to the strain on personal, financial and work relationships. And chewers of khat tend to be more inward-looking rather than reaching out to others, fueling further segregation. In other words, it can be antisocial in its impact. The Noble Baroness, Lady Meacher, again rang me this morning to advise me that she wanted some assurances on this issue. I can't give her the assurances she's seeking, but I at least can explain the government's thinking. She asked, what does the ACMD think of our decision to control khat? The ACMD did acknowledge the lack of robust evidence as to whether khat caused medical or social harm, and it's understood the scope of issues that the government would take into account to make a decision on drug control would go beyond the remit of that committee itself. And the government's decision was discussed with the chair of ACMD before it was publicly announced, and the chair of the ACMD accepted that we came to a different view on this occasion based on the consideration of the wider issues beyond those immediately the responsibility of ACMD. And on the question of temporary bans, which the Noble Baroness asked of, they were indeed a part and parcel of the passage of the Police and Social Reform Act, but they are very different. Temporary class drug orders were introduced as a swift legislative tool to tackle the fast-paced emergencies in the UK of psychoactive substances, or so-called legal highs, which we've debated. I've debated with Noble Baroness on other occasions. In essence, they are used where there was an urgent and significant threat to public safety or health. Often there's very little evidence of the harms that these drugs do, for the simple fact they've only been available for a matter of months, if not weeks. And so, advising a temporary class drug order, the advisory committee have just 20 working days to advise and only look at medical harms. Temporary bans are the exception I have to say to the noble Baroness, not the rule, and only lasts for 12 months. Khat is not a new drug where such a swift but temporary action is demanded. It is the role of advisers to advise. Yes, indeed.
Minister, I just wonder whether the Minister accepts, however, that the whole point about Khat is that the ACMD did look at the medical and social potential harms and concluded that these did not justify a ban. And the supply side issues, which Professor Iverson accepts may be slightly beyond their remit, are separate. And the whole point of what I was trying to say is that if you accept the ACMD's conclusions that the medical and social harms are in fact low and would not justify a ban, and they were very, very clear about that, then the case for criminalising possession and use really isn't there. Hence the value of something akin to temporary class drug orders. I wasn't suggesting you literally translate it completely, but the idea of simply focusing on supply, does the Minister accept that that actually does make sense in terms of the Home Secretary's comments and the evidence available?
No, I can't accept that. And when I spoke to the Noble Baroness earlier, I did say that I didn't think I was going to be able to give her much comfort. We didn't reject the ACMD's report, but as I have explained, the ACMD is there to advise in particular aspects. The truth of the matter is that they're there to advise. In the end, ministers have to make decisions and be prepared to stand by them, and that is what I am explaining at the present time. And if I may, I'll turn to the Noble Baroness's points, because I know that she has considerable concerns that we've not made proper efforts to prepare the affected communities with this ban, and I want to reassure her that we've done exactly. Any decision that's finely balanced, and we acknowledge that it is a finely balanced decision, needs careful and extensive preparation at national and local level, and our plans, worked up over a couple of months, are in place, ready to be rolled out once the draft order completes its parliamentary passage. So, we are waiting upon the decision that the House makes today to approve the order. I would ask the House to note that whilst we took a different view from the ACMD, we took on board its recommendations for locally led health and community-based interventions to meet local Khat needs and to monitoring the situation within communities. I know the Noble Baroness would like to have a review after a year. We don't see it in that way. We see it as a matter of continuous review. We're specifying that a close eye is going to be kept on the impact of this ban. In this, we're going beyond the usual approach to the monitoring of newly controlled drugs to ensure that locally and nationally collected data provides an evolving picture post-ban. And our policing response must be fair, consistent and proportionate, sensitive to local issues and community relations. And we're very grateful to the National Policing Lead on Drugs, Chief Constable Andy Bliss, for taking a personal interest in the development of the law enforcement approach to Khat, consulting police leads on counter-terrorism, stop and search, and out-of-court disposals, all aspects which the policing has to consider. And working with the police, we have a bespoke national policing guidance with a graduated system for dealing with Khat possession cases. And I apologise to the Noble Baroness if I have not made a copy of that available to her. It's actually not a Home Office document. Of course, it's a police document, but I will seek to secure it for her. And in addition, the police, we have a national community impact assessment informed by 13 high-priority police forces, highlighting the specific issues that require a tailored community policing response. And we expect it to be updated following the ban, and this is going to feed into our monitoring activity. The Noble Baroness was very mindful of the need to support Somali communities, and the government has reduced reforms that empower local authorities to serve their communities' needs. Khat is a local issue in many places, best addressed through commissioning appropriate services and tailored to the local community. And this approach is in keeping with the Advisory Committee's findings, which made specific recommendations in this regard. Public health directors and commissioners of health services will be central in delivering and reviewing our health and prevention response. Khat is now part of Public Health England's joint strategic needs assessment guidance. This analysis analyses the health needs of a local population, including how health, well-being and social care services are commissioned within local authority areas. The drugs information, the government's drugs information, FRANC, will support wider prevention work, including online materials such as fact sheets translated into Arabic, Amharic, Somali and Swahili for use by local organisations. And we know that community leaders and relevant local authorities are ready to act. And we've seen case studies of local partnership preparations which set out actions for community engagement and community approaches across health, prevention, integration and law enforcement. And we'll also be publishing those so that learning can be shared and promoted. The Noble Baroness is absolutely right to raise the concern that Khat users might replace Khat with other drugs or alcohol. And we've considered this complex question with the Department of Health, and the Department of Health's approach will focus on preventative activities, including public health messaging, to alert Khat users, specifically dependent and vulnerable users, to the dangers of other drugs and signpost them to support services. The Noble Baroness mentioned the conversation we had about support for Kenya. It's right that our decision to control Khat is primarily concerned with the protection of the UK public and the UK's ability to reduce the threat posed by the international Khat trafficking trade. Nevertheless, we are committed to giving as much notice as possible to our international partners, including Kenya. The UK has a long-standing and constructive relationship with Kenya, a friendly nation. Our engagement includes a programme of aid for development, supporting the delivery of independent projects like the Market Access Programme, working to lift low-income Kenyan households out of poverty through access to high-value markets. My Lords, this coordinated response is in keeping with our overarching aims to protect the public and community from drug harms and to support dependent and vulnerable users into recovery. It's a response which I assure the Noble Baroness Lady Smith of Basildon has been devised with those communities that use Khat very particularly in mind. And we will continue to work with our partners, including those communities themselves, to support the successful implementation of the ban. This is the government's response to the motion of regret. I'm sorry the Noble Baroness has felt that she's had to table it. I'm grateful for all noble lords who have eliminated this debate, but I respectfully ask the noble lady to withdraw her motion, and I recommend the two orders to the House.
My Lords, once again today, and I'm sure on many other occasions, I'm grateful to the Noble Lord for the time he takes and the care in responding to issues raised in the debate. And I hope he understands from all corners of your Lordship's House, the only contributions made have been to express concerns about the government's actions regarding the ban on this drug. And our concerns are, with such a finely balanced decision, as the government and the Noble Lord Minister has said, how it is implemented is very, very important. And I have to say I was somewhat surprised at the uncharacteristically ungenerous comments of the noble lady Baroness Hanway, who said we were looking for something to do. And I find that a curious expression when we're looking at a very serious issue in what is actually a very busy day for your Lordship's House. And these issues strike at the heart of how such a policy would be implemented. And the noble lady said that she wasn't happy with the regret motion and the motion before us. It was open to any member of your Lordship's House to table a regret motion or any other kind of motion. And indeed, we had previous debate on this issue in the Grand Committee. We have another debate today. And I think the noble lord should understand there are grave concerns about the government's actions. I'm grateful to him, particularly on police. I think he's given us some more information on policing. And where I think my greatest disappointments are particularly on the issue of health. I did say in a previous debate, I think the noble Lord Ahmed responded to on drugs, that the Frank website isn't really an answer in cases like this because somebody has to be interested in order to access the website in the first place. And I think in an issue like this where the government's seeking to ban this particular drug, it has to be very proactive.
I'm sure the noble Baroness will admit that this is not the sole intervention that the government is making, but it is part and parcel of a package of health and community activities which the government has commissioned as part of this. And Public Health England indeed is very active and will be very active in pursuing this particular ban.
That's helpful, and I look forward to receiving more information. But the point is on all of these that they must be in place and understood prior to the implementation of any ban, which didn't. And I think my greatest disappointment, though, is the noble lord's failure to commit to a review. For us, that is absolutely crucial. At 12-month point, there should be a full understanding, published figures, published information on the, given such a finding bank's decision, to say we continuous review seems to be an opportunity not to have the serious review that we're seeking. So I'm grateful to his response. I'm disappointed that he hasn't been able to address all the points we raised, and I beg to test the opinion of the House.
Yeah.
My Lords, the original question was that the draft order laid before the House on the 31st of October 2013 be approved. Since when an amendment has been moved by Lady Smith of Basildon at the end to insert the words set out on the order paper. The question is that this amendment be agreed to. As many as that opinion will say content. Content. To the contrary, not content?
Not content.
Clear the bar. My Lords, the question is that this amendment be agreed to. As many as that opinion say content. To the contrary, not content.
Not content.
The contents will go to the right by the throne, the not contents to the left by the bar. The question is that this amendment be agreed to. There have voted contents 125, not contents 216. Therefore, the not contents have it. The question is that the original motion be agreed to. As many as are of that opinion will say content. Content. The contrary not content. The contents have it.
This has been a campaign that was going on for a long time, over 10 years. When we started, it was back in 2000 and before that. And we are really glad the British government to protect the Somali interests and Somali children and their well-being to ban the Khat. Because the reality is that I have been working for the community for over 20 years. And what I have seen, it's clear evidence that Khat is harmful to our community.
It's affected a lot of people. There's a lot of people who in hospital, mental illness, and there is families who been divorced or separated, and there is a mothers who, and there's a children who lose their mothers because of child.
The husband is chewing chat all night, he's sleeping all day. The mother, she's doing all the work. And the children, they need their father to be there at schools and support with their father. So I agree, it does a lot of issues, and healthy and mentally, physically, absolutely, it is a threat.
The moment the law comes into effect and the Khat goes underground, it will find its way into this country in one way or the other. And then the moment one is called chewing Khat, then you will undergo all those criminal records. So you'll find a lot of people who have been chewing Khat for so many years in this country go into the criminal record. That one is going to make it impossible for them to be able to get job. It's going to make them impossible to be able to operate in a society in a product which is harmless more than even alcohol. It's a social way of life for so many people, especially members of the Somali community who live in this country. These people are hard-working people. They work, they have children. So the propaganda that Khat is bringing problems to the Somali community is not true.
That's okay? Did you finish, y'all? Yeah, no.